I'd just like to start out by echoing around kind of the explosion in data and also the COVID impact. And so as we get into the kind of the talk and the format that I want to use today is to talk a little bit about kind of the customer challenges, the product set that we're bringing to market, and then some of the features that really build into our records management offer, as well as what we're doing next. But to start out, when we think about kind of the global pandemic that we're all wrestling with and the new realities of remote life, this has just been a huge cloud consumption driver across the board. And so I think Satya Nadella, our CEO at Microsoft, was recently quoted as saying, hey, we've seen 2 years of digital transformation take place in 2 months based on some of the impacts of this pandemic. So this is something that we're all in together, but we've seen kind of tremendous uptake. And when we think about that digital explosion, this is contributing to that as well. And so as Satya says here on the slide, it's impacting every aspect of our daily lives and something that we're all kind of wrestling with and dealing with in a collective way across both our professional and our work lives as well as our personal lives. So I want to make sure to recognize and acknowledge that as we kind of work through this together. But then if we step forward onto the next slide and we look at how Microsoft has been investing in solutions to help our customers overcome some of these challenges, and specifically kind of a set of solutions around intelligent compliance and risk management. I just wanted to lay the context of kind of all the different areas that we're working in before we go deeply into information governance and records management. So quickly, when we think about the different areas of investment and what we've heard from customers that they need help with when they think about managing their digital estate and managing risk, we have kind of 4 big buckets of solutions that we've been delivering capabilities within. And so the first one is around information protection and governance. And this is where we'll spend quite a bit of time today. But this is really around protecting your sensitive data and then also governing that sensitive data and content that's critical to your business wherever it is, whether it's in the Microsoft cloud or in some other applications as well. And we have ways to do that through connectors and other. And then the second piece is really around insider risk management. And what we've heard from customers and even our own, our CISO, our lead security officer here at Microsoft is that, of course, there's always threats of attacks coming from outside the organization and risk of breach. But really, one of the things that really keeps leadership up at night is the risk of internal damage to the organization, whether inadvertent or malicious. And we think about employees and people who have internal access to our own systems as actually being a huge risk. So we have a set of solutions about monitoring insider risk and understanding what activities might be taking place that are posing or creating additional risk for your organization, as well as communication compliance and enabling organizations to monitor communications across Teams, email, Skype for Business, and all the different modalities to ensure that, hey, one, are we within policy that we have within our organization? And 2, are we meeting our regulatory requirements for monitoring communications for specific roles? And so some really great adoption stories that we've seen there as well. The third bucket is really around discovery and respond. So being able to find the content you need when you need it, whether it's to respond to a regulatory request, an investigation or a litigation, it could be a privacy request. And so this is where our e-discovery and our investigations capabilities fit, including our audit capability, which really underpins all of our solutions with that comprehensive audit log. And then finally, compliance management is an area we've been investing as well with the compliance manager and now the compliance score capability. And really what we want to do is help customers on their journey towards compliance in the Microsoft cloud and beyond. And so these are things where you can look at assessments for common regulations like GDPR. You can also bring in your own custom assessments, and you can understand the changes, the implementations that you make in your Microsoft services and how they impact your journey towards compliance with those regulations. And so this really gives you a dial on taking advantage of all the services and solutions that you have in Microsoft 365 to be more prepared and positioned for compliance vis-a-vis those regulations. So I just wanted to set that context as we go deeply into the first pillar with information protection and governance around the different things that we've been working on delivering for customers. So I think we can go to the next slide and kind of dig into the information protection and governance pillar specifically a little bit more deeply. So to break this down, there's a lot here, and there's a few things that we'll look at more closely as we go through the discussion. But first off, we want to help customers understand where their sensitive data is. And so we have a new data classification dashboard that we'll look at a little bit later that's really around knowing your data. We actually had a great customer, one of our design partners, said to us, hey, it's 10 p.m. Do you know where your sensitive data is? And just this challenge of knowing where that sensitive content is in your organization, given that unstructured nature, can be a really difficult task just to start with. So this dashboard kind of brings together your sensitive content, shows you where it's located, and helps you start to wrangle with that. Of course, we want to prevent data loss and accidental sharing or oversharing of your sensitive data, and then apply protection actions to that content as well. But ultimately, we're here to talk about governing your data and retaining your data to the right schedule, deleting data on a schedule, and storing that data in a compliant and records management compliant way. And so we're going to drill into that specific piece a little bit more closely. And if we go to the next slide, I just want to emphasize that within information governance, we really have two solutions. And so today we're going to talk mostly about records management. It's kind of the new kid on the block, recently became GA over the last couple months, and we're really excited by some of the adoption that we're seeing with this solution, but did want to highlight information governance as a key related solution that oftentimes comes up in the similar conversations. So if we go to the next slide, we just have kind of a quick visual to illustrate a little bit about how we think of these things being connected, but also distinct. And so for information governance, we really think about this as the way to manage risk and liability broadly, and really only keeping what you need and deleting what you don't as you look across your digital estate. And I've heard some people explain this like, hey, we've got a principle that when we have, as a family member and a homeowner, we're getting new stuff, on a regular basis. But as new stuff comes in, hey, we got to get rid of the old stuff and send stuff to Value Village or move it on down the line. So in some ways, we're thinking about, hey, you got to be able to prune that content so you're not just building that corpus of content and filling up that garage. You got to be able to get rid of stuff on a regular schedule to really be able to kind of maintain your productivity and manage your risk. And so information governance is all about kind of what are those broad policies that you're going to put in place to kind of keep that digital estate at a manageable level. And then when you think about content that's exceeded its useful life, how am I going to get rid of that content over time? There's as we think about kind of content and the lifespan and the useful value of that content, it's going to, over time, the value of that content goes down like this, but the risk associated with that content is going to continue to rise. So organizations want to prune and get rid of content that's no longer relevant. We call it ROT, kind of redundant, obsolete, or trivial, at the same time while maintaining and preserving the content that's critical to the organization. And that's a little bit of where records management fits in, where we think about, hey, you've got high value content that requires specialized workflows, kind of the crown jewels of your business in a way that require specific parameters and policies to manage that within. So records management is the solution that's provided to help you kind of manage those specific records and crown jewels of your data estate in that compliant and specific manner. So a little bit about how those two pieces play together. Let me go to the next slide and just highlight, actually reinforces the inflection points and the sentiment that he's seen in the market with some of the research, but a little bit about what we've heard from customers and their challenges in this space. And so quickly, one is, hey, records are everywhere. So this data explosion concept and how am I managing and keeping my records? What's the cost and complexity of managing those records now that we're in this new way of working and so many companies are coming to the cloud to work and receive the benefits of productivity and collaboration. And then we also hear about, hey, my end users are great. It's a really smart group of employees, but we just don't trust them to correctly label and get everything organized in the right way all the time. So we want to make sure that there's ways and safeguards that we can put in place to use the system and use some of the automation that we have to support those end users and making sure that, hey, we don't have records that are mislabeled or put in the wrong location or not labeled at all. And then of course, we don't want to lose any records in the shuffle. So if we're if we're moving content into a separate system, what's the overhead on the end users to do that? Is there a simpler way to support productivity and collaboration whilst maintaining the compliance of your records? And then, of course, the last piece, and this kind of goes across the board in the compliance space, is that, hey, the regulatory updates, the changing landscape of requirements is just staggering. This is a lot of work to keep up with. I think there's some stats around, over 700 updates on a regular basis from over 250 regulatory bodies. So it's just a shifting dynamic that requires a lot of engagement to stay up with. And so that's one of the areas that we've also worked on. Hey, let's make sure that we make this moving target something that we're partnering on with our customers. So there's a little bit about the challenge set that we started with when we went in to start to build out this records management capability specifically. So if we go to the next slide, just to kind of introduce records management as a solution set, this is really about managing your legal, business, and regulatory records and your obligations right within Microsoft 365 platform. So of course, SharePoint is a fantastic document repository and collaboration platform. And of course, we've got Exchange where email and lots of business communications are taking place. So what we found is we're able to kind of do these record management activities right in place within the repositories and the locations that are being utilized for productivity and collaboration. So this is built in, and you can classify, retain, review, dispose, and manage this content right within the system. It's also intelligent and something that we're continuing to invest in to reduce that end user burden so that we can help you do automated and intelligent classification of content in a number of different ways. And we'll take a little bit of a deep dive into that classification approach next so that we can just kind of make sure we're clear on how we're approaching that. And then finally, that it's defensible so that we're providing you proof of disposal, documented audit trails, all the components that you need to be able to take to your regulators and say, hey, I am retaining this information for the proper amount of time, and I have the right audit trails and protections set up around that content. So this is really the records management solution that we just released to general availability over the last few months, and is now starting to get some good attention from both customers and from some of our partners as well. So if we go in, I want to spend just a few minutes on the classification, because really when we think about information governance and records management and protection, classification is the key of how we're going to go ahead and start making the right policy decisions for this content. And so, of course, we have a manual process where you can create a label with a policy and publish that label out to your users, and then that's available to be applied to a piece of content within those work surfaces. And that's kind of the standard, the tried and true. That's the way many organizations, that's kind of the backstop, is that manual application of the label to that piece of content by the user. But again, what we've seen is that the automation is really a key requirement, and a lot of organizations are looking to reduce that end user burden over time. So when we look at the automated ways that we can classify, we have a few different things that I just want to talk through quickly. We have location-based applications, so you can define a specific container and apply a label to that container. We also have metadata and property-based application of that classification. So you can use something like a content type to apply. So anything that has a content type of equaling X, then I want to put this particular label onto that particular item. We also have keyword-based classification, so you can say, hey, anything related to Project Foo should have this particular label or this particular policy associated to that. And then we get into things like our out-of-the-box sensitive information types. So we have about over 100 now sensitive information types that span financial data, healthcare data, privacy-related data, and you can create your own custom sensitive information type. We see a lot of organizations using this for if they have a lexicon or a dictionary of terms that they want to build into a specific sensitive information type. You can bring that in, define that information type, or edit the existing ones. And then the new kind of exciting way, the new kid on the block for doing this classification is what we're thinking of as these trainable classifiers. And these are where we're using a machine learned model to understand the context and the meaning around that content, not just the words that are included there, but kind of what is the sentiment. And this is really about custom types of information that are very specific to an organization that are kind of difficult to detect. There's not an exact standard on the way this information has been stored or documented. And so now I want to understand kind of all the the items that are related to a particular project installation or a particular contract type within my organization. So I can define that model, train that model with a set of test content, and then run that against a broader set of content and go ahead and tell it yes, no, in terms of, hey, your accuracy is right or not, get it to an acceptable level, and then use that to deploy a classification. So in addition to giving you the option to train your own classifiers, we're also providing a set of out-of-the-box classifiers around common scenarios like resumes, contracts, job descriptions. And so we're seeing some good uptake with that. So once you've done that labeling, you're classified, and then you have the option to put your policies against those labels. And so that's where we say, hey, you could have a policy of, we're going to keep this forever, never delete this piece of content. Or this is sensitive content that I know is important, but I want it to go away after its relevant time. So this is going to be a 2-year retain and delete policy, 5-year retain and delete, 7-year retain and delete. And then you have the checkpoint of, is this a record or not? And I can denote of that label policy, hey, do I want this to be a record? And then that creates specific requirements around that piece of content. And so this is just a little bit about how we approach classification, policy, and then implementing that governance and the requirements around those pieces. So I just wanted to kind of walk through that and make sure that we're on the same page around the different ways that we're bringing automation into this. So I think we can go to the next slide. I wanted to quickly cover on a few of the core features of records management, just to make sure that we're all on the same page of what it is that we're delivering, how it works, and why. So I'm going to step through, I think, about 4 feature areas relatively quickly, and then we'll get into a little bit of the roadmap before we go to Vivek for some of the implementation guidance and what he's seen with some of his customers. So first off is the file plan manager. So what we heard from customers was, hey, it looks like you guys are moving in the right direction. You've got some great capabilities with the labeling and the ability to do record labels, but I've got this retention schedule that's hundreds of lines long that's offline. How can I merge that or bring that into Office 365? And so what we did was create the file plan manager, and you can actually upload using a templated format into Office 365. It will create your label schema. We have a set of different levels of the descriptors that can be hierarchical. You can customize, so you can include things like reference ID, function, category, subcategory. You can export the file plan if you need to have it offline for review by another team. But this really makes it so that you can start to manage a complex retention schedule kind of quickly and easily and onboard into Microsoft 365 records management in a more seamless way. And so this was a key kind of addition that we brought into this records management over the last year or so. Of course, disposition review is incredibly important to the records management process. And so we have a disposition review experience, and the way that this works is that as you're setting the policy to go into a label, you identify, hey, do I need a disposition review for this label policy? And if you do, you kind of select that, and then you identify who are going to be the reviewers of that policy. And when that period comes up and it's ready to be disposed of, then that person will get a notification and they can navigate over to the disposition review and see all of their pending dispositions. So we've got some filters that they can utilize for, hey, am I looking at documents or email? I can search within that. I can do some date ranges, multi-select items, and then take that action to either dispose, extend, or change the label of that piece of content. Now, we've heard a lot of feedback, and we have some exciting plans that we'll touch on a little bit in the roadmap about how we're going to improve this over time. But just having this great disposition review experience where you can export and look at kind of all the items that are up for disposition has been a big step forward in helping customers meet their requirements here. Wanted to touch a little bit on kind of the act of declaring a record. This is such a critical thing, and really for a lot of organizations, this is kind of that tipping point into, okay, now we're managing records. And so how are we enabling end users to have an active role in that, even while we're starting to lean more on the system and automation to do some of that intelligent classification. But you can see here in the screenshot, hey, I'm in my document library, I've got my contract up, and I'm ready for this. This is kind of finalized. It's ready to be declared a record. And so if I open my info pane on the kind of the right-hand side, I can see that I have my various labels that have been published, and I can see which of the items is going to be most relevant, and actually select that, and that will be applied to that item, and that will then be declared as a record. And so I just want to kind of show that user experience of how this works. I think we'll talk a little bit about kind of the strategy around, hey, should these be in all the workspaces? Should they be in one workspace? How to manage that? That's really comes down to an organization decision. But the end user action is really quite simple of putting that label onto that document. And then finally, on the next slide, I wanted to cover on a feature that has been kind of a really cool one of bringing together productivity and compliance into the same conversation and equation for an end user. And this is around records versioning. So if you look closely kind of down in the lower right of the slide, you can see this record status, and there's a little toggle there and it says locked or unlocked. And really what we heard from some of our great leading customers who are kind of pushing the envelope on adopting Microsoft 365 for records was, we want to have ongoing productivity and collaboration with a document that has been labeled as a record. Hey, we might need to iterate, we might need to edit, we might need to create a new record from that record. And how can we kind of bring those two things together? So we implemented this feature around record versioning that really enables end users to do that. So if you have a record that's been labeled as a record, instead of that being kind of a locked black box now, the end user has the opportunity to go in there, unlock that record, continue to collaborate or iterate, and then relock that record once it's back to its steady state. And what we're doing on the back end is we're capturing a version of each of those records at that instance. So within the preservation hold library, as I unlock that, I have a version of that record as it was unlocked. So we're maintaining compliance in that process while giving end users kind of options for continued collaboration and kind of productivity in that workflow. So this has been something that's been exciting to see customers respond to and start to adopt in their records management process. So that was kind of a quick walkthrough of, I have one more around the Know Your Data dashboard, and this is related, but kind of a quick walkthrough of the feature set. And here I wanted to just kind of circle back on this because I think it's so important as we think about information management all up, and records management being a component of that, a really important component. But as we think about, again, that challenge of where is my sensitive data? As this unstructured data volume continues to grow over time, what we've brought together with this, and this recently GA'd as well, I believe it was mid-April, so just a couple of months ago, is giving you a proactive view of where your sensitive content is. So I can quickly see, hey, the highest used sensitive content types in my organization. I can understand the locations they're in, and then I can start to put some policies and process around that, whether it's a matter of applying record labels or applying protection or taking some actions to say, hey, I don't want all this PII in these people's OneDrives. Like, that's not the place to store PII. You need to make some changes, and I can reach out and let folks know that they should change their process. So this Know Your Data dashboard kind of brings together that view, enabling you to then take steps on kind of that data estate. Okay, so that was the quick feature walkthrough. I want to round out with a quick view on kind of what we're hearing in terms of the value props, how these things are resonating, and then we'll look at the roadmap and what we're up to next. So, really when we think about built-in records management, many organizations that we hear from are thinking, hey, I've got a system that I'm using now, I've got my users trained on this, how can I think about the benefits, and is it worth making the switch and kind of coming into maybe a modern approach to records management? And what we hear is that, hey, what we want to do is support productivity. And kind of the value props around doing this with the built-in, intelligent, defensible process that we've developed is, hey, I want to do this in line with productivity. So I don't want to have users having to go to multiple systems and managing and context switching. We know that could be a big drain on overall effectiveness. Also, I want to reduce costs. This is definitely a driver as we think about some of our customer organizations, what they're attempting to accomplish, especially now as we work through the pandemic and think about what's next. There's definitely a cost driver. We want to reduce risk. So I want to minimize the operational and legal risk that I have or that I'm creating for my organization. And part of this is I want to have less copies of my sensitive data. So if I'm copying and pushing sensitive data out to additional systems, each time I'm doing that, not only am I creating a need to maintain and secure that content in that other location, I'm also driving that sensitive content to that location and keeping it in its source location. Related, protect data effectively. We want to be able to, rely on the protections that we have in the Microsoft Cloud to do that protection for my core data in one place, and then ultimately achieve better compliance. And back to the suite of capabilities that we've been working to deliver, we think about the ability to do insider risk management. We think about communication compliance, e-discovery, and the other related workflows that are really important as we think about this sensitive data for your organization, kind of all being part of the suite that we're delivering in Microsoft 365. Okay, so let me kind of round out with the last slide that I have on what we've delivered and then what we plan to do next. And so quickly just have a kind of a breakdown on what's currently available, what we've shipped over the last few months, and then our roadmap priorities for what we're going to be up to over the coming time period. And so currently available, we talked through a number of these, of course, the record label, file plan manager, disposition review, automatic or manual declaration of records, the record versioning, the proof of disposal and the audit log, and now the data classification dashboards. And then on the information governance side, one thing that we didn't really touch on is this new set of native connectors where we have a way for customers to bring in non-Microsoft content into the Microsoft Cloud through a native connector system. And so for now, we've got kind of a small set, but we're working rapidly to expand that to a much broader set over the coming months. And so today, you can go take advantage of the LinkedIn connector, instant Bloomberg chat, really important for financial organizations who are using Bloomberg chat in their trading floors. I need to be able to monitor that. Facebook, Twitter, and then we're working on the next set of them that will be coming over time. So ICE Chat is there. There's a few other important top ones that we hear from our customers. And we expect over the next 6 months, 12 months, we're going to build this out to be a pretty nice library of several dozen connectors. So this really helps you start to archive and manage your data within Microsoft 365. And then, of course, policies and labels for SharePoint, Exchange, OneDrive, groups, and teams are a big part of information governance that's available now. Looking ahead and what we plan to do next, really it's around continuing to invest in records management and helping some of our most highly regulated customers accomplish their goals. So a regulatory record label is coming out that really helps achieve immutability at the item level, and this will help strengthen our position on immutable storage across Exchange and SharePoint, and this is coming out over the next few months. Multi-stage and reviewer-tailored disposition review. So I talked about, we've been hearing great feedback on the disposition experience we have now, and customers want more. So we're going to continue to build there. And then guided onboarding and helping customers get started quickly. And then for information governance, we're improving performance and reliability for core policies and jobs. More investment in the connectors, as I mentioned, and then we're expanding retention for Yammer and Teams recordings, which we know are top of mind.